"Who the hell are you, interfering with our business?" Gang leader, Diamond Tony's voice, cuts through the Oakland night. Standing across from him is Tupac Shakur, only 23 years old, but with 40 years of injustice burning in his eyes. "I'm these kids' big brother," he responds, knowing that tonight he'll either save the children or lose his own life. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Oakland, California, October 15th, 1994. Saturday night, 11:47 p.m. The streetlights on Martin Luther King Jr. Way flicker like dying stars, casting long shadows across cracked pavement that's seen too much blood, too many dreams die. The air smells like rain that never comes, and desperation that never leaves. This is East Oakland, where hope goes to suffocate, and where children learn the weight of survival before they learn to ride bicycles. Where sirens wail like ghosts every night, and mothers sleep with one ear open, always listening for the sound of gunshots that might claim their sons. Tupac Shakur walks down 73rd Avenue, his Timberlands making soft sounds against concrete still warm from the day's heat. He's wearing dark jeans, a black hoodie, and a Raiders cap pulled low. Not because he's trying to hide, but because these streets demand respect, and respect comes dressed in armor. Even at 23, Tupac moves like a man who's seen the world's ugly truth, like someone who carries the weight of every injustice ever witnessed. His shoulders carry the burden of being the voice for those who have no voice, the poet for those whose pain never gets written down. He's not here by accident. 3 hours earlier, at his mother Afeni's house on 64th Street, something happened that changed the entire trajectory of his night, his week, his understanding of how low humanity can sink. The house sits on a corner lot, painted yellow with green trim, surrounded by a chain-link fence. Afeni bought it in 1992, after Tupac's first album started making money, a modest home that represents everything they'd worked to escape from East Harlem, from Baltimore. Tupac was sitting on the front porch, writing lyrics in a worn notebook, when 8-year-old Kevin from next door came running up. Kevin's face was streaked with tears, his small hands shaking, clutching something against his chest like it was burning him. The kid was terrified, looking over his shoulder every few seconds, like something evil was chasing him. His SpongeBob t-shirt was too big, hanging off his thin frame. His shoes had holes in the toes, duct taped together because his mother worked 2 jobs. Tupac had known Kevin since they'd moved to the house. The kid was brilliant, the kind of 8-year-old who read books meant for teenagers, who asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. Kevin dreamed of becoming a scientist, talked about studying stars and planets, about discovering new worlds where kids didn't have to be afraid. When Kevin opened his small hands, Tupac's world tilted. Inside was a plastic baggie filled with white rocks, crack cocaine, enough to put a grown man away for years, sitting in the palm of an 8-year-old child who should have been worrying about homework and cartoons. The story that poured out of Kevin's mouth was worse than any nightmare Tupac had ever imagined. The Diamond Crew, led by a dealer named Diamond Tony Rodriguez, had systematically recruited every child in a 6-block radius. 8-year-old Kevin, 6-year-old Destiny, 10-year-old Marcus, 7-year-old Keisha, all of them turned into unwilling soldiers in a drug war they couldn't comprehend. The children had been given quotas that would challenge experienced dealers, sell, or face consequences that no child should ever consider. Their families threatened with violence. Their innocence weaponized, their childhood stolen and replaced with plastic baggies and terror that followed them into dreams that used to be filled with superheroes. The operation was sophisticated in its cruelty. Diamond Tony had identified the most vulnerable kids first, those from single-parent homes where mothers worked multiple jobs, kids who walked to school alone, who were hungry enough for belonging that they'd accept any adult who offered attention and protection. Tupac took the drugs from Kevin's trembling hands and sent the boy inside with instructions to stay hidden. Then he sat on that porch for 2 hours, staring at the baggie, feeling something crystallize inside his chest. Not just anger, purpose, clarity. The kind of moment that defines who you really are when everything else is stripped away.
The warehouse sits like a cancer on the corner of 77th and International, windows boarded up with plywood that's been tagged and retagged by different crews marking territory. Graffiti covering every surface in layers that tell the story of Oakland's street evolution. Tags from crews that no longer exist. Names of dead soldiers memorialized in spray paint that's already starting to fade. But it's not abandoned. Light bleeds through cracks in the boards like infected wounds. Music thumps from inside, the heavy bass line of gangster rap turned up loud enough to mask conversations about quantities and prices and territory disputes. The sound of laughter that has nothing to do with joy and everything to do with power. The clink of bottles, the shuffle of money changing hands, the occasional shout that could be celebration or argument or threat. This is Diamond Tony's kingdom, where childhood goes to die, where innocence is currency and fear is the most reliable form of control. The building used to be a furniture store, back when this neighborhood was working class instead of post-industrial wasteland, when families saved up to buy couches and dining room tables, when small businesses thrived and children could play outside after dark. Now it's been repurposed into something that would have horrified the people who built it, who worked in it, who believed that buildings should serve communities instead of destroying them. Tupac approaches the front entrance, his footsteps deliberate, unhurried. He's not trying to sneak. He wants them to know he's coming, wants them to have time to think about what's about to happen. Each step echoes with intention, with the weight of someone who's made peace with whatever consequences are about to unfold. He's thought about this moment for 2 hours, considered every possible outcome, accepted that some fights are worth having regardless of whether you can win them. 2 lookouts flank the door, both armed, both young enough that they might have been in high school if the streets hadn't claimed them first. They're maybe 17, 18 years old, trying to look hard but still carrying the uncertainty of teenagers playing adult games with adult consequences. They see Tupac approaching, and their hands move toward their waistbands, but something in his presence makes them hesitate. Maybe it's the way he walks, like a man who's already accepted whatever consequences are coming. Maybe it's recognition. This is Tupac Shakur, the voice of the streets, the poet of pain. He belongs here in a way that makes violence feel unnecessary. The first lookout, wearing a Chicago Bulls jersey and gold chains that probably cost more than his mother makes in 6 months, shifts his weight nervously. He knows who Tupac is, has probably listened to his albums, maybe even respected his message about fighting back against oppression. But business is business, and this is Diamond Tony's territory, and nobody gets to walk up to the front door without permission. One lookout disappears inside, his footsteps quick and urgent. The other watches Tupac with curious eyes, trying to figure out what business the famous rapper has with the Diamond Crew, trying to reconcile the man whose music talks about revolution with the man walking alone into enemy territory, without backup, without weapons, without any of the usual protocols that govern street negotiations. Inside the warehouse, the music stops abruptly, creating a silence that feels heavier than the bass line that was shaking the building moments before. Conversations halt mid-sentence. Card games freeze with hands unplayed. Money stops changing hands. Word spreads like electricity through water, person to person, whisper to whisper. Tupac Shakur is outside, alone, apparently wanting to talk to Diamond Tony. The tension builds like pressure in a sealed container. Everyone in the warehouse knows this isn't a social call. Tupac doesn't run with crews, doesn't do business with dealers, doesn't get involved in territory disputes unless something personal is at stake. If he's here, it's because the Diamond Crew crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. Diamond Tony emerges through the front door like a king holding court, like a man who's never had to question whether he owns whatever space he's occupying. 28 years old, built like a linebacker, gold teeth catching the streetlight, wearing enough jewelry to buy a house. His neck chains are thick enough to moor boats. His rings catch light like warning signals. His watch costs more than most people's cars. But the jewelry isn't just showing off. It's armor
psychological warfare, a way of announcing that he's untouchable, that he's won the game they're all playing. He's flanked by 6 members of his crew, each one carrying the kind of casual violence that comes from years of claiming territory through fear. They move like soldiers, like men who've learned that hesitation gets you killed, that in their world respect is earned through intimidation and maintained through consistent application of consequences. They don't wear uniforms, but they might as well. Everything about their posture, their positioning, their hand placement announces their willingness to escalate any situation to its most violent possible conclusion. The confrontation that follows becomes the stuff of legend in Oakland. 2 men representing different versions of street power, different philosophies about survival, different answers to the question of what you do when the system fails you completely. On one side, Diamond Tony, who's built an empire by exploiting the most vulnerable members of his community, who's turned poverty into profit and desperation into control. On the other side, Tupac, who's taken his pain and turned it into art, who's used his platform to speak for those who have no voice, who understands that real power comes from lifting up your community instead of feeding off its weaknesses. Diamond Tony sees opportunity. Tupac Shakur, angry about something, alone in Diamond Crew territory. This could be leverage, could be respect, could be the kind of moment that builds reputations. But Tupac doesn't come to negotiate. He comes to deliver an ultimatum wrapped in truth so sharp it cuts through the October air like a blade. The children stop working for the Diamond Crew. Tonight, all of them. Forever. No exceptions. No compromises. No gradual phase-out period. The kids go back to being kids, and the Diamond Crew finds another way to move their product. Diamond Tony's response comes in the form of laughter. Not amusement, but the kind of laughter that precedes violence. The laughter of a man who's built an empire by never backing down, never showing weakness, never letting anyone dictate terms in his own territory. The physical confrontation that erupts lasts less than 3 minutes but feels like hours. Tupac, outnumbered 7-1, doesn't fight like a rapper. He fights like someone raised in the streets of Baltimore and New York, someone who learned survival from his Black Panther mother, someone who understands that some battles are worth bleeding for. But numbers matter, size matters, experience matters. By the time it's over, Tupac is on the ground, breathing hard, tasting blood, his ribs screaming with every breath. Diamond Tony stands over him, ready to end this permanently. That's when something unexpected happens, something that changes the entire dynamic of what everyone thought they understood about power and respect and the way the streets work. From the shadows around the warehouse, figures begin to emerge, slowly at first, then in larger groups. Residents of East Oakland, mothers who've watched their children disappear into addiction, fathers who've buried sons to gang violence, teenagers who remember when these blocks were safe, old men who fought in Vietnam and came home to watch their neighborhoods burn. They don't come armed with guns. They come armed with presence, with solidarity, with the kind of collective power that exists when an entire community decides it's had enough. Mrs. Johnson from 74th Street, whose grandson was killed in a drive-by last year, Miguel Santos, who owns the corner store that gets robbed monthly, Pastor Williams from the Baptist Church on International Boulevard, dozens of them, surrounding the warehouse, bearing witness. They come because word spread, because Tupac's mother Afeni made phone calls, because Kevin's mother told her sister, who told her neighbor, who told her friend, because sometimes one person's courage gives permission for others to find their own. Diamond Tony looks around at the faces in the darkness and recognizes something he's never had to consider before. The community itself, standing together, refusing to accept that children should carry drugs, that fear should rule these streets, that profit matters more than innocence. The standoff that follows isn't resolved with violence, it's resolved with mathematics. Diamond Tony and his 6 crew members against an entire neighborhood. Good business means knowing when to cut losses, when to find new territory, when to recognize that some fights cost more than they're worth. The Diamond Crew disappears that night. Not because they were beaten in a fight, but because they were beaten by something more powerful than fists or guns. They were beaten by a community that remembered it had power when it stood together. 3 weeks later, Kevin knocks on Tupac's door with a drawing he made at school. It's a picture of a neighborhood where kids play on swings instead of carrying plastic baggies, where teenagers shoot basketballs instead of each other, where the streets are filled with laughter instead of fear. Kevin gives the drawing to Tupac with a message that becomes the foundation for everything Tupac writes for the rest of his life. The boy tells him that courage is contagious, that one person willing to stand up gives others permission to do the same, that sometimes being a big brother to the neighborhood means risking everything to prove that children shouldn't have to grow up afraid. Tupac frames the drawing and hangs it in his studio. Every time he writes a song, every time he steps up to a microphone, he sees Kevin's vision of what East Oakland could become. Not a place where children are soldiers in adult wars, but a place where childhood is protected, where courage matters more than corner profits, where the strongest person in the room is the one willing to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. The story spreads through Oakland's music scene, through the hip-hop community, through anyone who understands that real power isn't about how much fear you can create. Real power is about how much hope you can inspire, how much change you can create, how many children you can save from having to grow up too fast in a world that profits from their innocence. Years later, when people ask what made Tupac different from other rappers, the answer isn't his flow or his lyrics or his charisma. The answer is October 15, 1994, the night he walked into Diamond Tony's territory with nothing but courage and came out with proof that sometimes one person's refusal to accept injustice can change an entire community. The night Tupac Shakur proved that being a big brother to the neighborhood means exactly that. Protecting the family, no matter the cost, no matter the odds, no matter how many people tell you it's impossible. Because impossible is just another word for something nobody's been brave enough to try yet. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button.